This improbable history is about Bob, who is really big into bicycles. Before I forget, just think of Bob as your Uncle Sam. Bob rents bikes by the mile, and he has the biggest business in town. Bob doesn't just get paid by riders who have signed an agreement with him, or even just those using Bob's bikes. Bob gets something every time anybody in town does any riding at all, through an odd combination of circumstances that took many years to come together. Set the Wayback Machine. Bob's Bicycles was launched long ago by the great-grandfather of the present Bob. Great-grandpa Bob started out not only with a main location for his contract business, he also set up spots around town where he parked some of his bikes for use by the occasional rider, on an honor system. Riders were expected to keep track of their mileage, and send Bob a 1040 mileage ridden/rent due form in the appropriate rent, periodically. The form was real simple, didn't take but a few seconds to complete, and had this catchy little oath to support Bob's honor system. To begin with, everybody understood that where it says bicycle on one of Bob's W-2, 1099, or K1, rider reporting forms or notices, it means one of Bob's bicycles. After all, what legitimate interest would Bob have in getting a report about someone riding a bike that wasn't his? Indeed, what business would Bob have even asking for a report about someone riding a non-Bob's bicycle? So, these forms worked well enough to begin with. Everyone understood what they were for, and Bob's honor system bicycles were all painted bright red, thus mistakes were few. Some mistakes did happen though. So, great-grandpa Bob provided that the same reporting paperwork used to admit riding a Bob's bicycle on the honor system could serve to correct any errors. All that a victim of an erroneous W-2, 1099 or K1 rider reporting form needed to do was fill out one of the forms declaring the truth of the matter. Over the years, things got a bit more complicated just by an unfortunate coincidence of a bunch of misunderstandings. For one thing, Bob Jr. stopped distributing the reporting forms in person. Folks who had never even met Bob started getting Bob's forms in the mail. Along with the forms came prominent instructions advising the recipient to use this form to report the use of a bicycle by any person. The note that when used on one of Bob's forms or notices bicycle means one of Bob's bicycles got reworded into more complex legalese and buried in a lot of new fine print. Eventually, the clarifying note moved off the form entirely. First being replaced by a cryptic reference to where the definition might be found in the bicycle forms, publications, and policies guide, then ultimately being dropped altogether, under the principle that knowing what the forms are for is the responsibility of the person filling one out. Naturally, folks misunderstood and began filling out and sending in these reports every time they saw anyone riding any bicycle, especially after Bob stopped painting them red. Bob maintained a really active PR department, and he also had the most aggressive collections and legal operations in town. People were eager to keep in Bob's good graces, especially after hearing about Bob suing for his money. The simplest and safest course of action was just to fill out a report whenever anyone was seen on any bike. The town's kids were growing up with the impression that Bob had some kind of legal interest in bicycle usage. Once they got jobs, their company would automatically fill out one of Bob's forms, even when they rode their own bike. If the rider didn't then send in the rent, Bob's collection agency would be all over them like ugly on an ape, with no questions asked. By the time the grandkids of the first Bob's Bicycles customers were riding, everyone had heard stories about riders who, having not paid Bob, were hauled into court and accused of bicycle rent evasion. It appeared that, if just evading Bob was proven, dire consequences followed. Bob, it seemed, could charge you rent for using your own stuff, and the legal system would back him up. By then, almost no one alive could remember back to the beginning, nor was anyone even trying to read through Bob's bicycle forms, publications, and policies guide, thousands of pages in length. Further, by then Bob's Bicycles was so big and rich that Bob had a hand in everything that went on in town. Paying rent to Bob became something to be done with pride. Paying rent to Bob was good for the community, some even said it was patriotic. In his best move ever, Bob instituted a payroll deduction program, under which the townsfolk are encouraged to anticipate how much writing they are going to do over the year, and then have part of their pay sent to Bob each week. Most folks never even really notice how much they're sending to Bob. Bob is still chortling over this one, decades after thinking it up and getting a cartoon buck to sell it to the people. Needless to say, Bob's forms have gotten rather complicated. Whole industries spring up to help people fill them out for a fee. The average person gets a refund from Bob each year and view it like a birthday present. All in all, Bob has succeeded in creating the perfect storm of misunderstanding. Well, that's the story of Bob's Bicycles. Today, everyone in town plans all their affairs with Bob's piece of the action factored in. Indeed, big chunks of the population do nothing but handle Bob's bicycle-related activities. Deep within Bob's Bicycle forms, publications, and policies guide, the long-forgotten truth rests, waiting for anyone willing to go to the trouble to take it out for a spin. In closing, are you tired of peddling your arse all over town for Bob? If so, get a copy of Cracking the Code by Peter Hendrickson and educate yourself about the forgotten truth hidden behind the income tax curtain.